What should be a definition of a or beyond superpower?
Is an abode of beauty and happiness. Now, where eventually everything comes down to how the man is enabled and what is he enabled to do. So, where every being is enabled for the highest knowledge and highest happiness would be the land of least conflict and greatest harmony. So, where people can live harmoniously, non acrimoniously. Now, where our current institutional structure, as we just discussed, is it pits for disintegration, it does not pit for integration.
Why do you say that?
While it unifies at an Indian Union level with a common military and common polity, all the natural identities have been disincentivized for harmony. Region to region, there is a conflict. Group to group, there is a conflict. Tradition to tradition, there is a conflict. Thought process to thought process, there is a conflict. And this is because the Indian Union has pit them that way. The carving out of geopolitical unions, the units, is not exactly aligned with the geocultural units, which are the Deshas.
So tell me more. What do you mean? How? Why? What Deshas? I know we've spoken about it, but for repetition's sake.
The bigger subcontinent had 56 Deshas, which are the geocultural units. Each region has its own unique language, culture, ways of life, dressing, all these things. Now, whatever this unity and diversity that people used to drum about is exactly the diversity of these Deshas. This traditionally, we had an orthogonality of institutions between the Rajas and the Deshas. So, you could have a kingdom that spread multiple Deshas, in which case every Desha still was administered according to the local practices, languages and customs. There was no one political entity imposing its own language or culture on any other Desha. Marathas did not enforce their language across the country when they ruled the country almost attack to katok. Vijayanagara did not do that. Gajapati did not do that. Nobody did that. Because it was very clearly understood that the geopolitical is a temporary organizing unit, whereas the geocultural is an inherited permanent unit. This difference is entirely not taken into cognizance by the Indian Union.
Are these geopolitical deshas, the geocultural units, deshas, do they still exist in your view?
They exist always.
Always. Do right now also?
Yes.
For example, Kalinga or Mundel, or would these be deshas? What are the deshas?
Some are the Rajas. So the list is there, 56, but take example of this Vidarbha or Konkan Desha. They are under these different states, the Karnataka and Maharashtra.
Right.
Maharashtra is a geopolitical state. So there are multiple Deshas, but it has one official language which belongs to just one Desha. The other Desha has no representation. So the Tulu is unhappy, the Konkan is unhappy, Gorkhas are unhappy in Bangla. Telugu Nadu people were unhappy under Andhra. Now they separated. Right. So this displeasure is there primarily because the concept of nation state, one language, one region, one culture, therefore one political unit. That's fundamentally incompatible with the way India works. And this design problem exists today, which is one part of the conflict, disharmony. The other part of disharmony is how the monotheism is incentivized and the polytheism and the sampradaya multiplicity has been disincentivized. So all this put together, essentially this is an union that breaks.
Let me probe you a little more. Why do you say that? Why is polytheism or sampradayas disincentivized?
Because the Indian state's notion of religion, understanding of what a religion means, is a Protestant notion. Religion, the term religion itself comes from there, then the term denomination comes from there. So the right to propagate, most importantly, comes from there. So exactly why should you be having a fundamental or even a right to propagate at all? There is a right to practice, propagation should be subject to the merit and acceptability. It should not be an unconditional right given to anybody. It should be a very conditionally curtailed privilege that people earn through their conduct, through the merit of their ideas. Now, it is because certain cults don't have that merit of the idea, they have used state power to impose in the past, and that is well known. Why should that be allowed now? Why can't it be a land of freedom where people practice what they choose, and then the merit of the idea determines how long it will continue or it will not even continue? That should be the natural way of things. And that's how it has always been. Many traditions came in this country, many traditions disappeared also. Today we don't even know many traditions that existed in the past which served a very big purpose. So that's an organic system. When the system is organic, there is harmony. There is no real fight or acrimony because people are not insecure or threatened about the enforcement of any other idea.
But the Indian state, for instance, I would argue, or people would argue, that is not pushing any state. Yes, you've given right to propagate, but that means that that right exists everywhere. Everybody can propagate. Every sampradaya can propagate. The SGPC can go and say, no, Sikhism is great and here are the values of Sikhism.
Why should they have to say? Why can't they simply practice according to what they think is right?
Okay, and people get it.
Why should there be a race of propagation now that somebody is propagating, somebody else needs to propagate to protect his own identity? Why should all this be there in the first place?
Why should be allowed? Would that not be curtailing freedoms?
How?
I don't know. I want to go and convert.
Sure. So, as a free person, if you want to propagate your idea, talk to somebody else and try to convince him. Why should this have to come into the constitution as a right to propagate? There is absolutely no
I
need.
want to talk to somebody to convert, have a shastrarth, or just have a conversation that my path is a better path. Let that happen between society, but why put that in the constitution and give it state power?
It comes that way because it is a Protestant notion. Propagation is an obligation of that religion.
Is an obligation of that religion, and so we've adopted the Protestant idea into the same notion into our idea.
Whereas practice is the general liberty anybody needs. Nobody needs liberty to propagate.
Yeah.
And whoever is knowledgeable enough, he will propagate and people will actually reach out to him.
Follow. That is how this country has always worked. A big guru comes and they talk about their thing and people follow. That is how all the modern gurus, for example, Sri Ravi Shankar, Sadhguru Jaggi Basu, they also that's how people follow. They don't convert. They just talk about the values of their ideas and people join them. Yeah, okay.
So this privilege actually causes both disharmony and insecurity and conflict, which is another example. That way, the entire integration matrix of India, of the Desha Kula Sampradaya, has been rendered a disintegration scheme. This whole thing becomes an integration theme if the state designs it properly.
I see a point here in which Dharmikas are primary citizens, but accommodate everyone else. Help us more. Are you saying only Hindus will be primary citizens or Indian religionists only?
Not Indian religionists. In fact, the Dharma becomes a common theme, and the idea, if we don't even use that word technically, the similar exact definition of what it really means, the natural order, is a common feature of many traditions outside India also. Most of the East, in fact, which is not converted into Abrahamists. So these have to be, while there is no religion boundary in Bharata, but there has to be the acknowledgement of these are the ethos by which this country runs, which if not acknowledged, as it is the case today, there is zero incentive to protect those ethos.
That is correct.
Which is exactly why the sense of threat comes. Yes. The native cultures feel threatened. So that has to be explicitly coming into the goals of the system.
So give me an example of this ethos, please.
Pluralism, diversity, understanding that there could be multiple ways to live life. Very importantly, identity is being infaced.
Say that again. Say more.
Identity is being infaced. Basically, I mind my business. Rather than I have a judgment to make about how you are supposed to live. Having a bipartite view of the world, insider and outsider, and then having a judgment about how the outsider should be.
So the state would actually take a strong view of people or groups of people, individuals, anybody, taking a view that only my way is right and everybody else is wrong. The state would actively say
State has to.
Okay.
Now, that does it mean it will penalize? No. But the encouragement is towards the worldview that you embrace diversity naturally and harmony. The worldviews that are bipartite and involve natural conflict would have to be explicitly discouraged through their conduct.
How?
So if there is a space, now this has been again implemented in the past, so by our kings, where the conflict creators are dealt with through the executive reasonably strongly enough, which Shivaji had done, which even in the past, forget the Abrahamists, even with the native cults where they did excesses, kings had dealt with them very strongly. But none of that required any legislative action. It was simply executive action because that was a legal. They created a law and order problem or disrupted civil order in the society.
Okay.
But I mean, it looks common sense to say this, but unfortunately, this doesn't happen today.
Do you think if that was not in the constitution, Christians, church would behave differently?
No, but the entire system works in a different way that forces the intolerant to act in tolerant ways. The intolerant would be forced to act in tolerant ways if the entire system works in that way, right? If the incentive is towards being intolerant and it is okay to do that, the whole direction is towards intolerance and disharmony, which is exactly what happened now.
The state is, by putting right to propagate, it's incentivizing intolerance and actually saying it's okay
And
as
aggression.
long and aggression because you're permitted under the constitution to do that. Very nuanced point here.
Where warriors are proud of protecting the land and the people as well as their ways of life. It's not just, okay, the warrior is great, he's doing a sacrifice to protect the borders, regardless of how the land is, how the people are. He may still be doing a great job, but how many would want to protect a corrupt people? Are they really proud of doing it?
Yeah.
Right? Whereas if they appreciate the divinity and the greatness of the land and the ways of the lives of the people, how would they act? The Banda is not just a military sacrifice that he did. It's for the way of the life he lived, and he died also.
Banda Bahadur. Yeah.
So similarly, so it would be a very different order of warrior we produce.
Yeah.
And that is the lineage of Rama, Yudhishthira, Arjuna. And where protection of geopolitical boundary is not just a underdog's achievement, but the assurance of a world power, where nobody actually prefers to touch your border. Obviously, it's a journey, we should get there, but that should be our dream explicitly stated, without which are we getting there?
Ayodhya. Right? That is what Ayodhya is, right? You cannot fight it. You cannot win against the state. You can't conquer it. And you say that Bharat is seen as a protector of Dharma worldwide.
It has to be an explicit branding where this state will protect these ways of life.
So if there is a Taliban in Afghanistan which has taken over, the Indian state will go to decimate
No.
and intolerant.
Okay, take one step back. You hear the amount of hesitation in the polity and supporters of the government when the Nupur Sharma episode happened, that we have to somehow maintain good relations with the Islamic countries, so we need to take certain measures. Right? In that context, see this statement. They are saying we cannot protect because somebody else
thinks that
in a certain way,
yeah, correct.
which is exactly the reverse
But
that is supposed to
they're
happen.
actually saying we're not even protecting inside.
So, what we expect is the reverse. This nation stands for these values, and if somebody like Afghanistan or Bangladesh is persecuting people, they should be wary of it.
Yeah.
We have this neighbor, and we are not supposed to be taking this kind of liberty.
Yes, so they will not be allowed to take that. If by chance they are taken over, they take over, they must be fearful.
Exactly.
They must be fearful that Bharat will invade.
Because you would exercise power, not merely have power.
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a military invasion at all, but still. But most of the times that fear acts. The point here is,
Basically,
if you are seen as the protector,
they will not be able to take over because they'll be fearful.
Exactly. It shouldn't come to the pass where you take military measures.
But if it does come to a pass like that India will be an assertive power which will go out and assert its military power if should the need come to it. Absolutely. Okay.
So all this is possible only when we have a righteous state, where the ethos are, or the rules of the state are to abide by the Dharma.